It was written in first person, so it makes sense why the writing had so much character to it. On more than one occasion, I have had to ask him to shut up. I thought this guy must have a death wish or something. That's not gonna go well for you. At all. Now, as for would I recommend the book? Is it bad if I say no again? Hi, my name is Terry Westwell and welcome back to Panic at the Book Club. This week we'll be discussing Enduring Love by Ian McEwan. If you'd like to take part with Panic at the Book Club, I do list the next 4 books down below and on TikTok, along with the discussion dates. I also accept your book feedback in a wide manner of ways. You could comment your thoughts below a video, send me a voice note, or even send me a short video of you discussing a book. Alternatively, you can just send me a direct message on Instagram. Even though we discuss a book every single Tuesday, I don't expect you to read a book every week. This gives you the opportunity to choose what genre best suits you and the time frame to read it in. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and maybe even give us a follow on TikTok. That way you can be alerted by new content and also know what books we'll be reading next. If you'd like to request or recommend a book, please feel free to send those in too. Enduring Love follows a man named Joe. Now, Joe had planned a postcard perfect afternoon in the countryside to celebrate his love's return from a 6-week-long trip. Now, unfortunately for Joe, and to be fair, a fair few other people, this afternoon did not go to plan. The day turns into a nightmare when they're involved in a freak ballooning accident in which a young boy is saved, but a man is killed. After such a traumatic event, the lives of everyone involved are forever changed, and not necessarily for the better. For Joe, meeting the eyes of fellow rescuer Jed Parry turns out to be not such a good idea. Now, Jed is instantly obsessed and makes the first of many phone calls to Joe that same evening. Now, how far will Jed go in his obsession? Just your friendly spoiler alert, if you haven't read this book yet, I would suggest going doing that first, because beyond this point, there will definitely be spoilers. All the chapters were a pretty decent size and relatively consistent as well, so it was really good for anybody who just wanted to read a chapter or two before bed. The narration was written in a very romantic style, though it was through a character that was really self-obsessed and maybe even a little pretentious. It was written in first person, so it makes sense why the writing had so much character to it. Unfortunately, that character made reading feel a little bit too much like homework. Although it wasn't a particularly difficult read, I did find that I had to pay that extra little bit more attention to follow Joe's internal monologue and ramblings. Now, it is hard to write a book in first person and not make the character seem a little bit self-involved, but keeping that in mind, I still felt that Joe was a little full of himself and maybe even a little narcissistic. Now, when Clarissa came home from a pretty long and crappy day at work and just needed a moment to herself, Joe couldn't care less. Like, he just talked at her non-stop and wouldn't give her a single moment. I feel like I have a unique sense of sympathy for Clarissa. As someone who is A, relatively happy, sat in silence in the peace and quiet on an ordinary evening, and B, has a partner who is relatively excitable, I do get how she felt. I mean, it's one of the many things I love about him, but on more than one occasion I have had to ask him to shut up after he's talked at me for a little bit too long. Later on, after Clarissa and Joe's argument and after Joe storms out, he calms down a little bit and plans to return back home because he believes that everything's going to be fine, the argument's going to be fine, it's all going to be okay. Not because he was going to apologise and not because he was in the wrong, but because now he sees just how clearly Clarissa was in the wrong. I thought this guy must have a death wish or something. Like, I'm telling you now, if you go back to your partner, That if you go back to anybody after an argument and try and tell them how much they were in the wrong, that's not going to go well for you at all. I must admit, it did quite a good job at throwing off the reader. I thought for a while there that it was just probably all going to be in Jo's head and that maybe even the stalker wasn't real at all. And part of me thought that maybe Jo was sick and Clarissa and the others were just being unsympathetic. Which they were a little. Like, even though it took Jo 2 days to talk to Clarissa about the first phone call, I really don't think that that should have made a huge difference in the grand scheme of things. Like, I'm not sure I would have taken that first phone call too seriously either. Like, perhaps he didn't get much sympathy because he's a man, and the writer thought that that would either be the correct or more likely response that he would receive from loved ones and law enforcement. I believe realistically that a woman would have a different perspective on the matter and would therefore be a little bit more sympathetic if a loved one was being stalked or harassed. Unless they're just a dick. I think Jo seemed to have gone from 0 to 100 with his own obsession over it. Like, I think if Jo had just sat down and had a conversation with Clarissa about it with a much more level head, it would have been a much more constructive conversation. Instead, he went from, like, pretty much just shrugging it off to being obsessive and maybe even a little bit paranoid about the whole thing. To me, that just didn't make it seem realistic at all. I think maybe because Jo was so self-involved and so focused on himself, but I didn't really get to know any of the other characters. Not that there were really that many anyway, but it was just all about Jo. The stalker, Perry, was clearly very troubled and unhinged, especially after the accident, and it was really interesting take and view on mental health. In fact, the whole book was a very interesting perspective on mental health, especially after a traumatic experience. Now, as for would I recommend the book? Is it bad if I say no again? It just wasn't for me, and I didn't feel like much really happened. It felt slow, and it didn't really feel like much was happening, and when something was happening, it just didn't seem to build any suspense for me. I didn't even care for any of the characters. I mean, the concept was really good, but it just didn't have any of those things that draws me into a book. However, it was clearly a thought-provoking subject, and, you know, from the very beginning, I didn't know what direction they were going to go in. But let me know what you thought. Did you enjoy the book? Now, Shelley said that unfortunately this book beat her and she just couldn't find the strength to continue and finish the book. It just didn't have enough to keep her interested, and the narrator was a bit big-headed. And with Vemba saying that it was an interesting concept, but the narrator was an insufferable know-it-all, their opinions weren't exactly miles apart. However, it seemed to be a really controversial read, with some people absolutely loving the book and other people not so much.
It's a good opening, isn't it?
Yeah, I've never read anything like it in that first chapter. It was just like, bam, we're there.
Oh, yeah, well, I mean, there were points where it probably would have been like a bit like, oh my god. But I'm looking at it through his lenses and he won't shut up.
Exactly.
Like, it's just not that climactic.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like, one of the main things I liked about it is that it was so just, I didn't expect that to go that way. Like, I think all I knew about it is when November said it's about a crazy psychotic stalker, and I was like, I'm in. I love that about it. I love that it kind of kept you questioning. And at first, you were like completely on his side. Like, well, I was like, oh, it's definitely not him. This is definitely happening. And then there were just these little hints dropped in throughout, weren't there? And I was like, oh, maybe it is him.
Yeah.
I did feel quite satisfied with how it did end.
Yeah.
I can see why people like it. I can see why Rebecca liked it. Like, but purely from a premise point of view, like, if someone came to me and said, "Oh, it's a book about this and this happens, then this happens," I'd be like, "Oh my god, it sounds great." And I'm just like, but the way it's actually written,
Yeah.
just makes me want to like tear my eyes out. Sorry, it's not that. No, you know what? I'm not that dramatic about it actually, because I didn't DNF it. I did finish the whole thing, but I was like really hoping I'd enjoy it again, and I did. It's just that I found new reasons to not like it as much as maybe I could have done.
Next week we'll be discussing Mad Honey, so don't forget to get your comments and thoughts in by Monday the 21st of August at the latest, so you can be a part of the discussion. You can now do this on YouTube, TikTok or Instagram. The following week we'll be discussing Yellowface, and don't forget, if you do need a little bit longer to read a book, I do now list the next 4 books down below, so you can choose which one best suits you. Thank you all for joining. If you like this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you all next week. Bye. I think my opinion is going to differ quite drastically from Rebecca's, and I think it's probably down to my opinion on the main character.
See, I like not liking the characters. I like it when the characters are like really like flawed, and I'm kind of the opposite, and maybe that's why I liked this one so much.
I think characters can be flawed. It's just more that he was so self-obsessed. I think it meant that you couldn't get to know any other characters.
There weren't that many characters.
I think I'd feel the same. Like, can you imagine if, like, your significant other has come home from work and, yeah, they're tired and they want a bath, but you're just like, okay, but, like, I'm being stalked and I really need you to take this seriously. Like, I really feel like my life's in danger. And it's like, it's easy to go, oh, but they were tired, they'd had a bad day at work. But I think I'd react the same way. I'd be like, no, I'm in complete panic mode here and I need you to listen to me. Like, I don't care if you need a bath, like, this is serious.
But I think also, and it never really came up, but it kind of like runs throughout it, he's obviously suffering with some kind of like PTSD from the incident.
Oh, definitely.
Understandably. And that's kind of like the cause of a lot of his reactions to stuff. But like, maybe that affects how he's dealing with it as well.
But
yeah, you really didn't think it was going to go where it did.
Yeah, no, I just had no idea where it'd lead. Yeah, I mean, for me, like, one of the main things I liked about it is that it was so just, oh, I didn't expect that to go that way. And I think if I'd have read that, like, I think all I knew about it is when November said it's about a crazy psychotic stalker, and I was like, I'm in. It's his mind. It's all about him, because it's not like he was paranoid, because it really was happening.
Yeah.
But yeah, obsessive about how he was reacting to it, I think describes it really well.
I'm waiting for stuff to bounce off, but just finding myself agreeing with both of you. Like, so, like when they go for a picnic in the first chapter, like they have it under this beautiful oak tree, and my teacher was like, this tree represents how strong their relationship was at the beginning of the book. And I'm like, does it though? Like, is that what Ian was thinking? Neither him nor Clarissa were bad people, obviously. Like, they weren't. It was just like, I guess, like, their social standing, like the circles they ran in, their upbringing, whatever. They were just very intelligent, upper class people. Yeah. That's just not relatable to me. Like, I'm never going to sit there and chat about Keats with someone. It's not going to happen. Like, I'm just a bit rough around the edges. I related more to the police, who were like, when he goes to them and he's like, oh, so I'm pretty sure this person has, what's it called? Clarenbolt syndrome. Is that what it's called?
Are you a psychologist?
Like, he's like, yeah, are you a psychologist, sir? Like, no. And like that would be me in my profession, when they're like, hi, I want a diagnosis because I think I've got bipolar. I'm like, oh, sorry, do you do this for a living as well?
Are
like,
you qualified to give them that diagnosis?
Yeah, I just related a lot to the police. Like,
I love that.
I mean, I also obviously didn't find it relatable, but that wasn't an issue, I don't think. I've never really thought of, like, I like it when I'm reading something and someone is relatable or there's a character where I'm like, oh, they're like me. I like that, but it's not a must for me.
But
I think
again,
he was probably just in shock, though. That's what I'd put it down to. Like, especially that
Yeah,
first night, if they were in bed and stuff.
he might be so traumatized that, he's forgetting things and therefore nobody's believing him. I understand all that, but relating to him as a person is like, just a bit different. Remind me, what evidence did she have, like clear-cut black and white evidence that this was all happening?
I think she had the letters and stuff, which she did suggest the handwriting looked familiar. Which, to be fair, if I was going to be a stalker, I would also write in their handwriting and make people think they're crazy too.
Like gaslighting, isn't it? He kept telling her that this guy was waiting outside, and then the guy kept moving.
She never saw him.
She was there, so she never saw him.
I think I'd start worrying about my partner's sanity. I think I'd be more sympathetic though. Like I'd placate it, I'd be like, "Oh, I'm sorry. It sounds really awful. I'm really sorry. I can't see what you're saying." At least in the beginning, Yeah, at least in the beginning, yeah.
Because she might have been more supportive. She might have been there, but he might not have interpreted it that way.
That's really interesting. I didn't think of it like that. Because he is so self-obsessed and it is all about what's happening in his brain.
Exactly.
He's the one narrating it.
When male authors write women.
Yeah.
I've recommended it to my dad because I think he likes kind of psychological, weird, that kind of thing. And I think he's familiar with Ian McEwan as well. So I don't think I'd just go recommending it to like friends.
Yeah, like I know that if I try and solve this book to someone and I just told them exactly what the premise was, they'd take it, and then they'd come back to me a week later and be like, "What the fuck?"
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. They'd be like, "Why did you do this?" Like, I didn't like it at all.
Yeah,
I did. I did feel sucked into the world. I pictured like the view of him looking out and seeing this guy on the street.
Yeah. I could picture it. I just didn't care to be there. I was like, oh, look, something's happening, and at least you've stopped talking. Like, but I still had to listen to his inner monologue the whole freaking time.
I wish I could like remember like why I loved it so much. I feel like I keep saying how much I loved it, but I can't really tell you why.
I feel that Rebecca reads a book going, God, I hope they get tortured. I hope that mentally and physically they're really put through the ringer, and I can I'll be really satisfied. I think that's what makes Enduring Love quite a good book, because it had the potential to go really over the rails with it. It didn't.
Yeah.
There's a lot of weird, horrible shit going on here. 5 stars.
5 stars. Okay, I'm excited for next week. I'll speak to you guys.
Me too.
Thank you.
Whenever.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.